something that they don't want them to trace it back to, which we'll get into. So thus they came up with the word melanin, which we'll talk more about that in a second. So now understand, I'm going to use melanin because you guys are more familiar with that word. And, you know, when I say melanin, I'm talking about carbon and carbon-12. Let's say carbon and carbon-12, I'm talking about melanin. So understand that. Now, they came up with melanin to hide the fact that melanin is carbon, which is an essential element. Plain and simple. You know, you have 6 elements that make up the building blocks of life, or what they call the elements of life. You have hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. You have carbon. You have phosphorus, and you have sulfur. These are basically the elements of life. And they understand when you start really digging into carbon, it's going to lead you back into some information they don't want you to really know about, which is going to lead you back to Kemet, and you're going to understand a whole wealth of knowledge, believe it or not, which we'll get into. So when you look at these elements, of course, you do not find melanin. So, you know, what is melanin? But you do find the properties of melanin in carbon. So let's take a look at something called carbon black. So now we're going to see the same benefits in melanin we find in this carbon black. So now it says, carbon black is a form of polycrystalline, which polycrystalline is like a liquid crystal. Polycrystalline carbon that has a high surface area to volume ratio, albeit lower than that of activated carbon. Now it says down here, the most common use, 70% of carbon black, is as a pigment and reinforcing phase in automobile tires. Carbon black also helps conduct heat away from the tread and belt area of the tire, reducing thermal damage and increasing tire life. Carbon black particles are also employed in some radar absorbent materials used in the reduction of the radar cross section of aircraft and in photocopier and laser print toner and other inks and paints. The high tinting strength and stability of carbon black has also provided use in coloring of resins and films. About 20% of world production goes into belts, hoses, and other non-tire rubber goods. The balance is mainly used as a pigment in inks, coatings, and plastics. For example, it is added to polypropylene because it absorbs ultraviolet radiation, which otherwise causes the material to degrade. So we can see carbon black. You know, carbon has that same type of properties that melanin has as far as shielding from heat. They use carbon black to make the TV dinner trays as well. You know, the ones, microwave dinners you put in the microwave. But, you know, they use it to keep, the tray from melting before your food gets cooked. So you can see they use carbon black in a lot of things. They use carbon black in the towels for the space shuttle they use on re-entry. So many different things you can find carbon black in, having those same properties as melanin, and it's something that a lot of people have no clue about. A lot of people don't even know about carbon black, but you can see how they go hand in hand. So of course they want to basically cover up melanin, cover up carbon, cover up the fact that it's an essential element in life. And if you go out and you tell, white folks that they lack an essential element and creating life, then you will understand why they have so many problems, so many health issues. You will understand, one, that Africans are superior because they're genetically dominant, more superior than Europeans. And of course, this is something that they do not want people to figure out. Now, also, when they're doing this research, because we're basically talking about what they're going to find out when doing the research on what makes black people black. Understand this. Grasp this. At some point, they had to do the research, and they did, of course. And in doing the research, they figured this out, and they figured out a whole lot more. So now, in doing their research on what makes black people black, they will find out, one, that it's carbon. It's carbon-12. Carbon-12 is essential to the building blocks of life, and African people have an abundance of it. So upon further research, they will find out that carbon has 15 isotopes. Of those 15 isotopes, 2 of those isotopes are stable. That's carbon-12, carbon-13. Now, carbon-12 makes up 98.93% of carbon. That's like most of the carbon. Carbon-12 is most of carbon. So they would ask themselves, well, damn, what is so special about carbon-12? How do you get carbon-12? And they will understand that you get carbon 12 through the triple alpha process, what they call the triple alpha process. Now, the triple alpha process involves 3 helium-4 nuclei. So you have 2 helium-4 nuclei that basically fuses, right? They fuse and they create barium-8. So you have 448. So 2 helium-4 nuclei fuse, you get barium-8. That barium-8 then fuses with another helium-4 nuclei and gives us carbon-12. So 8, 4, 12. So then carbon-12, we know carbon-12 is 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, which gives us carbon, which gives us man. So again, 666 in the Bible. I talked about this before. Boom. It goes back to carbon-12. This is major for them. It would blow their mind when they figured it out. And one of the main reasons why it would blow their mind is because they would know that the triple alpha process also can be found in the formation or the creation of stars. So it's like, well, damn, these people are a sun. And you can understand now, and you start taking this stuff back to Kemet. Damn, this is what the Egyptians was talking about. And there's so much more into this. But they will understand that it's something really special about African people. It's something special about these building blocks. And when you put all this stuff together, you know, it really leads you to an unbelievable conclusion about the power of melanin that they lack. So now, as I talked about in the Saturn Satan series, when we got into the planets and everything, and I talked about, you know, the solar system coming in existence due to a supernova, as science explains. I mean, think about that. So when you understand supernova is an explosion of stars. And I talked about how everything comes together and what have you. When you understand that, and then you look at the fact that, you know, these elements, the building blocks, you know, can be found completely 100% in African people, you know, it would blow them away. And as I talked about before, you know, you have consciousness creating energy creating elements, and those elements creating, you know, physical matter, you know, everything that we see, the planets or what have you. So they would look at this carbon-12, which they have to cover up and change to melanin, something different than carbon-12, this element. But they will look at it and see that, you know, African people can be traced back to the creator, can be traced back to consciousness itself, this energy. It's crazy when you really start breaking it down. And this is what they would find out. Again, you got to ask yourself, you know, how all this stuff get here? Where did all this stuff come from? And when you understand, again, consciousness creating energy creating these elements are the building blocks for everything that we see. So what basically scares them, and any scientist, any real scientist, or anybody who really studies, you know, physics, who studies the universe, the stars, what have you, this is so easy for them to basically get, you know, and it's tough because you have most of the scientists and physicists being white people. And for a lot of them, they would not come to this conclusion. And they most certainly probably wouldn't write about it and put it out there for people to criticize them on and call them traitors or racist or, you know, anything or what have you. So this kind of information is just really known in, you know, secret societies, and it's just not really put out there, you know, for people to really just get easily. So you have to understand, one, if the universe, the creator, God, whatever you want to call it, if the universe manifested itself into a physical body, it would be the black woman. It's just that simple. They understand that. So now check this out. You have consciousness creating energy creating elements, those elements creating the physical material universe that we see. Black people are made of those elements. We are energetic beings. We have a consciousness. It's just that simple. So the consciousness of the universe, the consciousness of God or what have you, creating the energy, creating the elements and the physical material reality of this universe that we see today is the same as when a black woman gives birth to a child. So the black woman is basically a physical manifestation of God, the creator itself. So when you understand how the building blocks work and you start backtracking and putting this stuff together, this is the conclusion that they will have come to, and basically trying to figure out what makes us black. And they did this a long time ago, and they understand it. And when they understood it, things changed, plain and simple. So There's no way you can do the research. You can do that research on what makes black people black and not find this out. So what do they just say? Oh, it's melanin. It's a pigment. And notice what he's saying in the beginning of the video. He says, oh, well, is melanin just something that just makes our skin black, or is it more to melanin? You know, understand that, because that's what people have been told. Oh, no, it's just melanin. So think about it. They did the research. What makes black people black? What is it? And they found all of this out. So they just said, no, it's called melanin. It's this pigment stuff that just basically makes your skin black. That's all it is. But then here you have, again, a doctor, a white man, gives up all this information. And it changes the whole understanding and the whole thought process of what melanin is. Now, again, he didn't say it's carbon. He didn't say it's carbon-12. And you can admit that carbon-12 has the same benefits of melanin, as I just talked about. So if he is to say that, melanin is carbon-12, and, you know, it opens a whole door to so much more information that they obviously don't want people to know and to trace back to the creator, which is what we trace back to. So you got to understand, it's a lot more to all this. You know, you still have to be a highly educated being to put this together. This is something I know people want to say, well, how do we form? How do we become humans? I know people want to think about that, but this is something that does not happen by accident. We are too complex for that. So, you know, Khnum, molding man on the potter's wheel, is telling you that we were fashioned, that we were created. And you have to understand there's a lot more into that, which we'll get into down the road. So it's not like, you know, Big Bang form and the planets form, and then eventually we just formed out of nowhere. We were created by something, because it's too complex to just happen, you know, like that. You can really look at the physics of planets coming together, but us, totally different. So now when you start understanding all this stuff, when you start really getting into it, you come to the conclusion that, you know, black people, there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be able to manifest any physical material thing that we want with our consciousness. Plain and simple. Especially since our subconscious is tapped into the energy of the universe. And it is. This is why I always tell you we have to gain control of the subconscious, because it's tapped in. And this is why they do everything that they do. So we do not gain control of that. But it should be no reason why we shouldn't be able to tap into it. So you got to understand, when you start really thinking about the process and thinking about how all this stuff deals with consciousness or what have you, then, you know, you come to the conclusion that, well, consciousness is just, you know, something that is the most powerful thing that we can really break down to. Because if consciousness is creating this energy, and this energy is creating elements, and elements creating everything that we see, then consciousness must be the creator, must be God. So you have to really, you know, really get into this kind of information when you start studying energy. And this whole energy that I'm talking about, we tap into, is what they call the unified field. You probably heard of unified field theory, which I do not like to really dig into and talk about, because, you know, energy is infinite. It's everywhere. When you start trying to break this stuff down into little categories and stuff like that, you lose sight of what energy goes back to. Because, you know, we're talking about science here, and science basically deals with what they can prove. And really, when you get into it, you start tracing back this unified field, this energetic grid they want to talk about, then, you know, really it goes back to consciousness. And you have a bunch of people who can't really conceive consciousness and really understand, you know, consciousness. Because when you start talking about where did this energy come from, you get into the whole idea that, you know, something can't come from nothing. And this is what a lot of people always say, well, you can't have nothing come, you know, something come from nothing. There's nothing. And then how does something come out of that? What is that? And this is basically what energy does. Energy is coming from consciousness, and consciousness, so to speak, is like nothing. You know, consciousness can be considered God. You know, when you read the Bible, when they say, the Christians, that God is everywhere, you know, consciousness is everywhere. When they tell you, you know, bow your head and pray to God or what have you, you're talking to consciousness. When you meditate, you are basically tapping into your consciousness. You are basically trying to develop your consciousness to basically, join together the masculine and feminine energy. So it's talking about consciousness when it's talking about so many different things that deal with religion. So Jesus, again, talking about going within yourself, meditating, consciousness. So these are things that it's tough for them to really grasp when it comes to this energy. So we got to understand a lot of the terms that they use, the scientific terms. If you notice me, I try to stay away from all that stuff. I try to really give it to you straight out. We can get into a lot of the technical stuff when it comes to all this stuff, but really, it's just basically what it is. You have consciousness creating energy, energy creating these elements, and then, these elements creating everything else. Now, if you really want to get into that process more, we can start thinking about sound and everything like that, and vibration and all that, as I talked about in Saturn Satan series. All that stuff fits in. But really, to keep it basic, you have consciousness, you have energy, you have elements, you have everything else. So as they say, God is unseen. Consciousness is unseen. Consciousness created energy, and they just can't grasp that energy coming from nothing, which is why they really can't agree on unified field theory. And a lot of this, the findings and studies are, not accepted. There's a lot of issues with it. So a lot of the researchers just can't come together on unified field, which is why, it has all the problems. But now let's go back and let's get into ancient Kemet. Let's go back to ancient Kemet and let's just look at the creation story. So as I said, consciousness created energy or what have you. So you have Atum. Atum would basically be consciousness. Atum created Shu and Tefnut. So you have Shu, which would basically be energy. Tefnut, which would basically be the elements. So Shu and Tefnut, we get Nut, which would basically be the sky and, the planets, the universe, or what have you, if you want to say that. And we have Geb, which would basically be, Jeb will be the earth. So you have consciousness, Atum, creating energy, Shu, and elements, which would be Tefnut. So consciousness, you have energy, you have elements, you have the creation of earth, and then you have Osiris and all the others, which would basically be aspects of nature and reality, which would be us, that exist. The sun is a major part of the whole thing, of course, because, an exploding sun is basically what created all this. So all this stuff comes together. So it's really easy to put it like that, as the Egyptians put it with the creation story, as you've seen how all this stuff comes together. Remember, out of nothing, Noon, in the waters of Noon, nothing, darkness, space, you have Atum. So Atum, consciousness. Remember, as I said before, consciousness needs existence in order for itself to exist. Consciousness needs something to perceive in order for it to exist, basically. So consciousness perceiving existence. And when it perceived existence, it became aware of itself. And then consciousness moved. And in moved, you have energy. And that takes energy to move. Any kind of movement you do is energy. So when you start going into all that, you can really start breaking down a lot of the creation stories from other civilizations as well that really go into basically what I'm talking about as far as consciousness creating energy, energy creating elements, these elements creating everything else. So again, the ancient Egyptians was on point. The Egyptians was on point with the information. They really understood what this stuff was about. And the reason why I break it down the way I do is because they break it down so easily for people to understand. So we talked about before how a lot of people don't want to count the, let's just say, the decipherment of the Egyptian hieroglyphics. And you just can't make this stuff up. The Greeks didn't know it. There's no way that they could really understand this information until they was taught by the ancient Egyptians. But the Egyptians obviously clearly had this information. And when you look at the symbols, because this is what you really have to look at, we can go by what they say, the symbols say, letter-wise or what have you. It don't always equal up. I like to read the symbols itself. I like to look at the actual symbols, and then you can start putting it together like a picture, like as far as what it's trying to say. But we can only speculate on some of the stuff, but when you start putting together the pictures and putting together information, and you start getting stuff like what I just said, it all start to make sense with actual science. So we got to think about all the civilizations that basically revere the sun and worship the sun or what have you, how they must have had this understanding about the sun and about, this whole process. So the sun, this is why they coupled the sun with Atum. So you have Atum, which I said is consciousness creating energy, elements, what have you. And they coupled them with the sun, Ra, Atum Ra, because the sun, again, exploding, that supernova creates everything too. So you have Atum Ra, you have consciousness and the sun being creators. So this is why, you have the whole thing with the sun and Atum Ra and everything else. And when you really start getting into Egyptian mythology and all the information, it just all adds up to things that we already found in science and physics. So this is stuff that it's like, when people talk this stuff about Kemet and start talking against it, what have you, it's proven. It's just no way around it. It boggles the mind when you understand how much they knew and how they metaphorically put it into these mythologies, and it all goes back and relates to math, science, physics, or what have you. It's an amazing thing. So now, of course, they had to come up with the word melanin to cover all this stuff up, because believe it or not, when they start doing their research, it all goes back to here. It's just no way around it. When you start digging, because that's what I did. I did the research myself, and I started digging, and it leads you there. So, they obviously, it took them somewhere where they didn't really want to go, and they don't want people to know, thus melanin. So now also, when you look up the etymology of the word melanin, you see it's Greek, of course, Greek. So melanin, goes back to Greek. It means black. And the more interesting thing about this is the word basically began in the mid-19th century. So we're talking about the mid-1800s. So you got to ask yourself, well, damn, that's recent. What was they calling it, before that? Did they know about melanin before that? Obviously they did, because they knew about carbon. Carbon goes back to the 18th century. We're talking about the 1700s. So they knew about carbon. So they understood this stuff. So again, we're talking about a fairly new word created by the Greeks. And we know if the Greeks created it, and it pertains to black, we know what they were trying to cover up. So melanin itself means black. It goes back to blackness. It goes back to carbon, blackness. And we can understand this stuff when you really start getting into it. Now, Denzel Washington's first movie, Carbon Copy. This movie came out in 1981. It's Denzel's first movie. Now, Carbon Copy, in this movie, you have Denzel Washington, black kid, basically going to his father, played by George Segal, a white man, and telling him, hey, I'm your son. So, carbon copy means an exact copy. So it's basically a play on words, because Denzel is clearly not an exact copy of George Segal, him being carbon or melanated. So I think that, one, you have to think they could have cast a more lighter person. I always thought about that in this movie when I watched it. It's a good movie. You have to think that, damn, it would be smarter for us to cast a light-skinned black guy, to make it more believable that this black kid is from this white guy. But no, they cast Denzel, and you can see he's clearly 100% black. No way he's mixed with anything. But I think that they did that to show that, melanin is carbon, and that, too, I think they wanted to show that, the stereotypes and things that black people of color go through because of their skin color. So, I wanted to point that out. But the movie was called Carbon Copy. And, and doing this research when, it just popped up in my head, carbon copy, carbon, black, melanin, about a black kid. It can't be a coincidence. So now, as I said, I really wanted to prove my point on what I talked about in Buddhism Part 2, so you can really understand. Now, believe it or not, I have basically proven my point about the esoteric occult understanding of God goes back to the African melanated people. It's just that simple, whether you choose to accept it or not. But I'm going to go further and prove my point. So we're going to go into the Bible. We're going to go into a couple more things. So now, remember, Dr. Karl Marat said this.
The body is actually a communication system where everything is connected to everything else, and it works through light. It works through light. It's called biophotons. And in this communication system, cells have connections to other cells called integrins, and electrons and light flows between cells. So it's like a supercomputer. Your body is like a supercomputer, and the skin is connected to every other part of the body.
So now let's go to Matthew 6:22. It says, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thy eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." Clearly, it's talking about the third eye. So now understand, as Dr. Karl Marat said, melanin is a conductor of energy. It can concentrate energy and absorb light. That energy, that light, is you. So, during meditation, when you meditate, your consciousness is using the melanin to basically activate your chakras and to activate your spiritual light body, sending Kundalini energy up the spine to activate the pineal gland on the third eye. Now, the third eye, the pineal gland, is the only thing that can fully tap into your subconscious. And white people have a calcified pineal gland and next to no melanin. So understand, melanin is the driver of your Kundalini. Melanin is the driver of your spiritual vehicle. It is the pilot, the captain of your vessel. So without melanin, you have no way of getting the energy to the brain. You have no way of driving the energy up the spine and activating the third eye, which will give you access to the subconscious. So because of this, you have white people, Europeans, you are a slave to your subconscious. You are a slave to the lower brain. It's just that simple. So this is why they call, white people the devil, Europeans the devil, because you can only access that lower brain. You are driven by the lower brain. And because you can't get this Kundalini energy, this Kundalini rising, this is all you know. So when you die, your energy only knows the material and not the spiritual. It's just that simple. So you need the melanin to get this energy. You need this Kundalini rising. You need to activate the third eye. All this stuff cannot be done without a driver. So you need the driver. So it's a known fact. Europeans have a 60 to 80% calcified pineal gland and next to no melanin. Now, this is not something that I'm saying to be evil or malicious or mean or something like that. This is a fact. This is why you have people like Dr. Karl Marat pushing chagas, and you have melatonin pills. So take the hint, take the facts, do the research. It's not somebody just being, Afrocentric or, spewing hate. This is somebody who's trying to help you and get you to understand what they do not want you to know. You need to grasp this. You need to understand, what's going on. So you have to get it. This is a fact. So when you get into energy transfer and you start understanding how this stuff works, and you have a lot of Europeans who do yoga, who meditate, what have you, because they have a sense for it. There is something embedded within them deeply that understands that they need to do this, which is why, when you start to get this understanding, you have a lot of the Europeans that say, well, I need to get into yoga, I need to get into this. And you have a lot of Europeans who try to be spiritual, but they can't really grasp it, and it's so many signs that we see that this is the truth. I mean, it's one of those things that when you have melanin, it's attaching you more to the spiritual. People are more spiritual, which we know we were in Africa and still are, more spiritual than, material, which is why they gave us the Bible and use spirituality to control us, because they know we're full of melanin, we're full of spirituality. So you see a lot of symptoms in Europeans that show up to show that they don't have this spirituality. They don't have this sense of the spiritual. Like I was talking about before with, white people hunting and just killing animals for nothing. That's not even done in nature. When they hunt, they don't kill for nothing. It's not done. They kill for food. That's it. It's not for sport. So that's one thing we see that Europeans do. So a lot of people say, well, black people hunt too. Yeah, this is what we was taught from you. So remember that. But hunting is one thing. And just the overall disregard for human life. And it's not all of you, of course, but you got to understand when we say that there is no empathy. It just shows up in so many different things. And it's not your fault 100% because you have been taught this hatred. You have been taught to basically go away from what you should be going towards.